Hello everybody, and welcome to my episode of Curious Austrian Tours. Today I'm going to be speaking about one of the most important historic aspects of the Second World War. And it is the Blitz, short for Blitzkrieg. And this is usually considered a military effort, by tanks, motorized infantry and artillery, and to create an overwhelming local superiority, when it comes to fighting. Now let me talk about, generally, the city of London during the war. By the middle of the 20th century, however, the streets and skyline of London changed more significantly than at any other time since the Great Fire of 1666. This time it was not a careless pudding lane baker who was to blame for the destruction of London, but the bombers of Nazi Germany. Although the Luftwaffe's attacks on London to the German was the heaviest in 1940 and 1941, the Luftwaffe's attack failed to force Britain into capitulation. It destroyed over 1 million buildings, left 30,000 Londoners dead and over 1.2 million homeless, out of those 2 million displaced across Britain, with many devastating air raids on other cities. The appearance of German bombers in the skies over London during the afternoon of September 7, 1940, it heralded a tactical shift in Hitler's attempt to subdue Great Britain. During the previous 2 months, the Luftwaffe had targeted the RAF, Royal Air Force airfields and radar stations as well for destruction in preparation for the German invasion of the island. With invasion plans put on hold and eventually scrapped, Hitler turned his attention to destroying London in an attempt to demoralize the population and force the British to come to terms. At around 4 p.m. on that September day, 348 German bombers escorted by 617 fighters blasted London until 6 p.m. 2 hours later, guided by the fire set by the first assault, a second group of raiders commenced another attack that lasted until 4:30 the following morning. Although no one knew at the time, this was the beginning of the Blitz. With the exception of one night, when the weather was bad, the bombing continued for the next 57 nights consecutively, with daytime raids as well. Liverpool, Manchester, Swansea, Cardiff, Bristol, Southampton were also targeted. This was the beginning of the Blitz, a period of intense bombing of London and other cities that continued until the following May. For the next consecutive 57 days, London was bombed either during the day or night. Fires consumed many portions of the city. Residents sought shelter wherever they could find, many fleeing to the London Underground stations that sheltered as many as 177,000 people during the night. Londoners and the world were introduced to a new weapon of terror and destruction in the arsenal of the 20th century warfare. Dubbed the Second Great Fire of London, as the Luftwaffe dropped 10,000 incendiary bombs onto the city and came within an ace of destroying the final centre of the British Empire. Only bad weather back in France prevented the bombers returning for what would have been surely devastating second wave. The Blitz ended on May 11, 1941, when Hitler called off the raids in order to move his bombers east in preparation for Germany's invasion of Russia. Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent word that St. Paul's Cathedral should be protected at all costs. It would boost morale to save Christopher Wren's masterpiece. But there was a hitch, a major one. Water was in short supply. The mains were being bombed, and although hoses could be filled from the nearby Thames, it was at an unusually low ebb, and exploded bombs lay there in the mud as well. Every day during the war, someone from Hampstead went up to the Whitstone Pond, the highest point in London, and if they could see the cross on top of St. Paul's Cathedral, London was safe and free. It looked like there was an enormous circle of fire, including St. Paul's Churchyard. Bombs rained down on the cathedral. Volunteer fire watchers patrolled the myriad corridors, armed with sandbags and water pumps to douse the flames. At about 9 p.m, an incendiary device lodged on the roof. As it burned, the lead of the iconic dome began to melt. But luck was on the side of the fire watchers. The bomb dislodged, fell to the floor of the stone gallery and was smothered with a sandbag. St. Paul's was saved. St. Paul's was surrounded by fire, but it came through. It stood there in its enormous proportions, growing slowly clearer and clearer, the way objects take shape at dawn. It was like a picture of some miraculous figure that appears before peace-hungry soldiers on a battlefield. Now let us take a bit of a closer look on the fire and our helpers. The first targeted air raid on London took place on the 7th September 1940, which marked the beginning of the Blitz. And for many people, this was the first experience, and also particularly for the firefighters in London. Most of the bombings happened at night, meaning firefighters spent long hours extinguishing fires or dealing with explosions. Bombs on warehouses were especially dangerous due to high flammable products such as alcohol and paint. In the first 22 nights of air raids, firefighters fought nearly 10,000 fires, bombings often occurring while the Thames was in low tide, meaning access to water was made even more difficult. Vehicles became vital in transporting water around the city, and steel frames were fitted to lorries to enable them to carry up lots of water. In order to take some of the workload off the fire service, small fires were dealt with by street fire parties. These were civilians who were given and taught to use stirrer pumps. Public's opinion of fire service changed significantly as a result of the Blitz. The spirit of comradeship among firefighters and the dedication to the job to do them very well were commendable, and, according to Winston Churchill, the fire service were a grand lot and their work must never be forgotten. After the Allied victory in 1945, the London authorities had difficult decisions to make, whether to repair, rebuild or redevelop. The task was huge and many plans took decades to fulfill. Yet, devastation gave architects a rare chance to reinvent the city, reworking the ruins for a new function. The hierarchy of official plans for the City of London, County and Greater London were the culmination of ideas about city structure, functioning and design, as well as approaches to planning that had been developing before the war. Where did all the rubble go to, you might wonder? Well, some of it went to what is now the site of the Olympic Park in northeast London. During the war, the Greater London Plan, roughly 1944, had been prepared as a blueprint for reconstruction and also relocating some Londoners and their jobs in new towns around the capital and in assisted areas in part of the English provinces. Construction of new housing was discouraged and tightly controlled in the green belt around London, and the subsequent dispersed growth of the metropolis occurred in more distant sections of southeastern England. The New Towns Act from 1946 gave rise to 8 new settlements outside the metropolis of London. Passage of Town and Country Planning Act, notably in 1947 and 1968, gave municipal authorities unprecedented powers of land purchase and control over development in London. The Festival of Britain in 1951 proclaimed national recovery and produced the Royal Festival Hall on the south bank of the Thames, as well as the Lansbury Estate, which is in a redevelopment area in Poplar. However, severe air pollution from coal-burning domestic house and industrial chimneys contributed to the Great Smog of 1952, which played a part in the death of 4,000 Londoners. During the subsequent quarter century, there was a vast improvement in slum clearance, construction of new houses and apartments, and improvement of services. Urban planning was more widely accepted. So, lovely people, thank you very much for listening today, and stay tuned for further videos to come. Cheerio!